So any questions from the audience for any of the speakers? Yes, please. Can you please, microphone?
What is a Superfund site?
That is a location where there, an industrial accident, something major's happened where toxic waste has accumulated, and the government steps in to implement remediation processes.
Any questions from the audience here or online? Mary?
Okay, this is from Judge Burton, and she spoke yesterday. She says, I currently do not allow the use of any product containing THC in my MH treatment courts. Are there any medical issues that you would suggest the use of THC for a treatment court participant? Someone who suffers from substance use disorder, lives with a diagnosed mental illness. For instance, I have one participant who suffers from seizures. Should I allow it for him as long as a responsible person has a caregiver license?
I think that might be for me. Can you hear me? Okay. I think there are other treatments out there that would probably be more appropriate and better studied. I think the real problem with marijuana and THC is that we just don't know enough about it. And THC acts on so many different receptors in the body that you get a panoply of effects when you're really only looking for one. I mean, it's really a good area for research to try and find a chemical that will just bind to a particular receptor and cause, help with seizures or whatever. But THC is more of a shotgun effect. You're going to help with the seizures, but also you may have all these other side effects as well. So certainly, I wouldn't recommend it either.
And Dr. Beeman would.
And she had a follow-up, which you sort of addressed already, but most of my treatment court participants believe that smoking marijuana is the best only method for dealing with stress. How do I dispel that with them in ways that they understand?
So I would say also that I think one of the strongest correlations of negative effects of cannabis is in the psychosis realm. Well established, documented that there is some connection between the use of cannabis and developing psychosis or precipitating a psychosis to someone that's vulnerable to it. As a psychiatrist and a severe mental illness psychiatrist, one of my strongest recommendations for anyone with schizophrenia is to not use marijuana. It's not going to help in any way. It may actually harm. So I would strongly recommend that.
So I actually have a follow-up question for Dr. Beeman regarding the psychosis. So there are claims out there, and I actually reviewed this up to date not too long ago, that the psychosis that's induced by the use of marijuana these days can potentially last up to even a year, and then there's claims that potentially the composition, of the way that they're grown today also affect the potency of the marijuana. Are there any truth to that?
Yeah, I would agree with both of those things. So the first thing is that when we talk about the psychosis that is associated with marijuana, it could be individuals have schizophrenia and they would have it whether they smoked or not, and the cannabis precipitates it earlier. Or it will make it more severe. But there is also this phenomenon of cannabis-induced psychosis where individuals would not have been psychotic had they not used the cannabis. And I think that is highly correlated with the THC concentration. So, the 1960s, peace, love, and rock and roll, where it was like 3 to 5%, we didn't see a lot of it. But I have admitted several people to the crisis hospital in Tulsa with no other risk factor or suggestion for why they're psychotic, except, I use some extract, I use some hash oil, and now I'm psychotic. I had a guy at OSU Medical Center that used marijuana his entire life. He was about 60, 65 years old, used it his entire life, never had a problem, always smoked it. He went to Colorado. This is years ago. He went to Colorado and did an edible that was much, much higher concentration than he had used before. And he was psychotic for the next 3 weeks, couldn't tie his shoes. He had to be in the hospital until that relented. So I do think both of those things are true.
Thank you. Any comments about, go ahead. Yeah, power and hold.
Oh, thanks. So if the state of Oklahoma is using or approving marijuana as a medication, what's our unit of measure? Because I have patients coming to my office saying, oh, I'm using it for anxiety. As a family practitioner, I'm stating that like there's much better ways, CBT, everything we've talked about so far, but what is our unit of measure for that illicit drug or drug?
It depends a little bit upon what the product is. Now, things such as edibles have to be labeled in terms of how much actual THC is in a serving, and then what the maximum amount of THC is in that package. Otherwise, it's really based upon, and this is true particularly for flower, the reporting unit is in percent. Well, then that requires someone to do a little bit of math to figure out exactly how much THC that they're actually consuming. So that is an area right now that that's kind of the state of the system right now, in that for the most part, outside of edibles, things are, well, not just edibles, but what we call production batches, final products, edibles, beverages, topicals, will list on there what in a typical application or typical serving, the amount of THC there is. That's not true for marijuana flower.
And I just want to add on, as I'm the executive director of the OMMA, and what we are attempting to do right now is kind of put a genie back into a bottle. In 2018, when 788 passed, it exploded, innovation exploded. And we are in a daily position to get into the industry and force them to follow our rules, meaning force them to label the products properly, that the testing labs force them to test properly so that we can trust what's on the label. We're not there yet, though. So my plea to everyone in this room, especially medical professionals, is to do as much research as you can. So when those patients talk to you, you can talk to them about how there are other options. If you're going to use it, though, start with a very low dose. So understand that the dosing you'll see on Oklahoma shelves is far too high for most people. Most people cannot not use, these 50 milligram gummies. That is for very long-term users who just want to get high, or people who are maybe in stages of cancer. And I am not a medical professional, I'm a lawyer. So that's my opinion based on what I've seen in this role. So we need doctors to come in and say, okay, if you're going to use it, use a really low dose, like give some type of advice, hopefully, because right now people are just out there testing things out. And that's how people are ending up in the emergency room, because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're taking. And Oklahoma has allowed, because of the way the law is written, not because of what we've done, but because of the way the law that we are required to implement has done. There are products on our shelves that you wouldn't see in any other medical cannabis state. And it's products that are far too high in THC for just medical purposes, for just the day-to-day anxieties and that kind of thing. So I have a lot more to say about that, but my plea is that we can have a partnership with medical professionals to have these conversations.
Yes.
Are there any public service efforts, like with the ad council, those kinds of advertising in the media, so that lay people can be cautioned in this regard, just across the board?
That's one of our current initiatives, and we get kind of sidetracked by the enforcement efforts because there's so much for us to do. And we're constrained by legislative budget appropriation. So last year we were actually working with a PR firm to implement a wide scale social media push specifically for youth, 13 to 17-year-old, to just let them know what is in those vape cartridges, because there's such an epidemic. Well, I use that word as a lawyer. I'm not using it medically, sorry. So there's a problem with children getting their hands on vapes specifically. So we are working on the part that we can as the regulators. We need partners. We're partnering with some other state agencies, talking to the legislature about appropriating more funding for that education piece. But yeah, we need partners to help us with that part.
Go ahead.
And just a quick follow-up, and I should think that that would be a priority, and really should come first. So I would really work with all of these people. It's a safety issue, and really it should be a duty of
Yeah,
everyone
absolutely.
involved.
And I mean, the other side of the safety issues we're dealing with are, 4 people getting killed at a grow facility. We cover all of that. So we prioritize our day-to-day and week-to-week based on the resources we have. But absolutely, I agree with you that education is a priority.
Any questions from online? Oh, online questions? We'll give the
Yes.
online audience a chance first.
Can you explain a little more about what a caregiver license is, and are there safeguards to ensure that a caregiver is not diverting or reselling?
Do you want to handle that one? Go for it.
Yes, the idea of the creation of a caregiver license is to provide the ability for people who maybe aren't very mobile, who are homebound, to be able to still access medical marijuana. So that's why the creation of that license was put into place. What was the second part of the question?
They asked, are there safeguards to ensure that a caregiver is not diverting or reselling?
Well, to be honest, and not just at the caregiver level, that's clearly an issue for every license type that's out there. We do require the use of medical marijuana to be tracked in that inventory system that I mentioned a while ago. So what you start out with and what you end up with, that's the way we track whether or not that was handled properly or not. But specifically diversion in and of itself is clearly an issue, not just at the caregiver level, but throughout the industry, and for patients as well. That's actually a larger gray cloud over what are patients actually doing with what they're allowed to possess or grow on their own.
Tony, may I ask you a question?
Sure. Go ahead, Dr. Sandbar.
I would like to ask a question of all the speakers. They have not really addressed the Delta 8 and the more potent new. There are many products that are like THC that are now available and are being actually sold. I wonder if each of the speakers might consider talking about the new products and what are we going to do about them. They're certainly much more potent, some of them, and may cause more harm, and yet they are not governed by the THC laws. So Adria would be hopefully addressing some of those issues because they are derived from hemp. And they are not under the same umbrella as the THC.
Yes, Dr. Sandbar, I can start with what we're going to do about it, but I would love to hear from the medical professionals about what you're seeing in the field on these products. Lee mentioned Delta 8, and that's just one of the many analogs that we're seeing. And Lee can talk through the scientific, how these products are being created. But the big picture is that innovation has gotten ahead of regulation over the past several years, especially since the 2018 Farm Bill. It left the Congressional Farm Bill left open this loophole that allowed innovators to come in and take a hemp plant that's less than 0.3% THC by total dry weight, take it and through chemical conversion, either natural chemical conversion or utilizing solvents, and create products that are actually intoxicating. But the loophole is that these products are often not regulated by state regulators, and that's the case in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, our law is written so that the OMMA can only regulate products that are over 0.3% THC by dry weight. I'm kind of simplifying here. There have been some recent articles in the newspaper talking about this. It's finally getting some traction. And the group that we're a part of, the national group, the Cannabis Regulators Association, we recently spent time on Capitol Hill talking with Congress about this specific issue and the need for a federal fix. We need the federal government to come in and fix this. And if they're not going to, the state will take the responsibility and regulate. But what we're seeing, every state across the union that has attempted to either regulate these products or ban these products has been sued. Every single one. They're all tied up in lawsuits because the hemp industry has begun to realize this is not all the hemp industry. So the intoxicating cannabinoid industry has realized this is the only way they're going to make money off of growing hemp. And so they have I'm probably getting into the politics of it, but they have a financial reason to fight against closing this loophole. But what we're seeing in Oklahoma are products that are literally in gas stations, in CBD stores. They have no age requirement for purchasing. These products mimic and often are more intoxicating than the products you can purchase in a legal dispensary. So it is pervasive across the US. In Oklahoma, we are working on state level regulation for the legislature to run through the legislative session next year. But what we really hope is that the federal government will come in and close that loophole in the farm bill. But there's a lot of lobbying going on Capitol Hill, so we're not sure what's going to happen. Lee, take the mic from me. I'm talking too much.
Well, back to the concern about these products, in addition to their intoxicating effects, well, a little bit about that. You will hear people talk about Delta 8 is Delta 9 light. Some people will even say Delta 8 is 70% as intoxicating as Delta 9. But this is dose dependent. So if you had a Delta 9, say gummy, that was at 10 milligrams, a Delta 8 gummy at 13 milligrams does the same thing, will produce the same amount of intoxicating effects. So in essence, you are able to get access to more intoxicating than their counterparts often in the regulated side of medical marijuana. So that's one big issue. Another big issue is the way these are created. Most of these are not naturally in a cannabis plant, or they're only there in such minute quantities, it is simply not feasible to go through the process of extracting and creating a product out of them. So how this actually works with out of the hemp industry is that CBD serves as the precursor for all of these other compounds. As if we could pull the chemical structures back up, they're very similar, THC and CBD. So if you go through a chemical process, you can convert that CBD into Delta 9, Delta 8, almost any tetrahydrocannabinol that you wish. But to do that, you have to use some extremely toxic chemicals, the solvents, strong acids that if there's no control over their manufacturer, how can you say those aren't still there after that manufacture's done? The other thing that's a particular concern for me, and something that I hope we can get a handle on with our quality assurance laboratory, is that as Dr. Neal mentioned, there are a lot of other constituents in a cannabis plant besides THC. What is being done to those when those are being subjected to concentrated hydrochloric acid, acetic acid, sulfuric acid? What else is being created? So if a product, and it kind of goes back to this gentleman's question earlier, if a product is labeled as 25% Delta 8, what's the other 75% that's created in this manufacturing process? So those are in addition to the incentives to not regulate this that's out there. This is kind of from our point of view, these are the things that we need to consider so that these are being regulated and that we can again assure the public is safe. There's one product out there that actually the federal government created it back in the 40s. It's called THCO acetate. And if you look, you'll see that's becoming more and more. We see it on the shelves in flea markets here in Oklahoma. That was created by the US government to investigate how to disable enemy combatants. Now, they gave up on it. It did turn out it wasn't a very good mechanism at all, but still the idea behind it was that we'll get these people stoned and then they can't fight us. So,
It's like,
So,
well,
my quick
how about
question, what do you
Dr.
guys-
Beeman? We only have time for one last comment from Dr. Beeman. and
Yeah,
then we
I
have
would
to take
just
a break.
say real quick that we see this all the time in drug policy. It's called ballooning or even cockroaching, that when you shed light on one area, it spreads out into darker areas. You put your foot down on one part of the balloon, it explodes into a different part. So the more we regulate, the more that regulation gets up with innovation, the more we're going to see analogs.
Thank you, Dr. Mead. So